And that's all anybody's doing, they're just looking up for those.
I just see some of them don't see the district.
I mean, we're not, but they're not, they're district.
Good morning, folks.
Morning.
I want to welcome you here to our February 6th Agriculture Committee meeting. We'll now have the roll call.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Davis.
Here.
Representative Eklund.
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative Ottman.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Schmid.
Here.
Representative Strzok.
Here.
Chairman Winter.
Here.
You.
Thank you, Mark. I want to call your attention to some housekeeping issues here. We've had to change the order a little bit as to the bills we're going to talk about today. We have, instead of House Bill 243 being second, why we have House Bill 109 to be the second time because of a problem with one of our representatives, and he's going to present it to us. So anyway, again, welcome, and ask you to, when you are testifying, to address the chair and to state your name and who you represent, and then give your testimony. And if we're going to kind of see how this testimony goes on these issues, we may have to limit the amount of time you can testify, because we have a lot of bills to go through today. So we'll try to let you know what we're going to do as we go along. So first bill on the docket is House Bill 90, and it's we have to finish this bill. We didn't get it quite done the last meeting, so I'll turn the time over to Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd like Joyce Minke to come up and finish her testimony before us.
Good morning, Chairman Winter and committee members. We left the other day with a question being asked, why is this bill important? I'd ask, why not? Why not? And I'll tell you why it affected us. But it took over 2 months for it to come down our valley and get to our herd. And then it took over 2 weeks for the process for it to get identified. We lost over 30 head. We are in a position, being old, that we could make choices to absorb the loss, which if you take 30 head of young bred cattle, which these were, it was our young herd, they're selling for $3,000 a head. That's $90,000. Those young cows would have stayed on our ranch, and we have a very high bred success rate. We figure on those calves being the income for us to operate our ranch on. So calves right now that we would have selling would have brought us $2,000 a head. That's 30 head. That's, as I gave you the paper, $30,000 that we have to, okay, where are we coming up with this? So anthrax is a deadly, quick death. By the time everybody did the best that they could to find out what it was, they first thought it was a plant toxin. While we were quarantined, and this bill allows for a quarantine area besides the ranches that report. If you don't report, you're not quarantined. So while we're quarantine, and we have cattle dying. Neighbors that did not report, trucks were hauling cattle out of there by the hundreds, and they ship in about 10,000 yearlings in our area a year. So they're gone. We're quarantined, and they're driving right by the county road through our ranches or the neighboring ranches, moving their cattle. If this bill does not pass, and the bill designates a surveillance area, a quarantine area, they quarantine for bird flu, you quarantine for brucellosis in an area surrounding. You tell me there's a magic fence line that's gonna stop the flies, whatever it is, from transmitting it only one direction, and it's not gonna go over to this ranch, then why should we report? If we have a contract to sell our calves and we do have a breakout, because I would guarantee you that the anthrax is definitely in our soil. If we're gonna bury 6 within all the ranchers, and there were 5 herds that were affected, and I know this for a fact. Those 5 herds were reported. There just happened to be 2 herds on our ranch. But there was no investigation. We did not have an extreme drought. We did not have a flood. Our pastures are not overgrazed. They were on a hay meadow that had grass anywhere from 4 inches to 6 inches up. It was an irrigated hay meadow pasture land that they've been on since May. So what's gonna stop this if you don't protect? And if it is transported in however, because now it's there, we don't know what's gonna happen. I bet you any of the officials do not know what's gonna happen. This is a new area for everybody. It's a new area for the health department. They were scrambling to treat me. I was treated in Colorado and was in a hospital and I'm very blessed to be here, thanks to God. But your bill designates their surveillance area around those that report, which will cover those that don't report. But if they're not going to report, we know what it is. We know how to treat it. Are your protocol guidelines, are they just guidelines, suggestions if you don't pass a bill? Is there any power to give the Wyoming Livestock Board the authority and for Dr. Hazel to do anything? Or can she just suggest this? I say without the bill, the livestock industry, because it's the independent rancher, that it's not some corporate ranch that doesn't care. I know one person that lost 1/3 of the herd. That's a big income. That's your livelihood. How do you pay it back? You go to the bank? Do you borrow money to buy that herd back? Do you give up? Do you quit? We're just asking for protection, because if this goes someplace else, like I say, we're old, we got choices, but young people, and the ones that were hit were young people.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay,
Appreciate your testimony.
is there any questions?
Does the committee have any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Mhm. Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I guess that would be up to you if you want to end public testimony and we could move the bill.
We could do that.
Oh,
Oh, okay. Would Director True come forward and our state veterinarian?
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Steve True, Director of the Wyoming Livestock Board, with Dr. Hallie Hazel, your state veterinarian. A couple quick comments, and then we do want to be involved in the discussion on some of the language on the bill when we get there. But a couple of comments, and again, I want to reiterate how we empathize with the folks that suffered from this, but it's nobody's fault. It's an act of nature that anthrax's spores are in the ground endemic all over the world. So we never know when and where that may happen. But I do want to comment on one of her comments. The bill does not reference a quarantine area. And it's important for the committee to understand that Dr. Hazel can only quarantine infected animals or infected premise. She can't stretch that out to the neighbors or down the road. You could be, an example might be, so Ms. Minky would be under quarantine for somebody that had a trick-positive bull 5 miles down the road. That's not within any state vet's authority to extend that beyond premise or animal. So I want to make that perfectly clear. And I understand the economic losses by all of the folks that were affected by this. It's important to know that there is 2 federal programs that were available to them. The LIP program, the Livestock Indemnity Program, or ELAP, the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program. Both of those have advantages that could have been taken by the producers, their choice, completely their choice, whether they wanted to apply for those or not. But I just want to make sure that the committee understands there was some indemnity available. And I think that was my comment on that. If Dr. Hazel wants to comment on the disease and the ability to spread and why we quarantine certain other diseases differently or reach to contact hers is because of the way the diseases are spread. If it's aerosol or a nose to nose, this isn't that case. This disease doesn't spread that way. But I would defer to her to comment on any science she wants to or anything else real quick before you go into the bill.
Dr. Hazel.
Chairman Winter, Dr. Hallie Hazel, Wyoming State Veterinarian, Wyoming Livestock Board. I'd just like to mention a couple of things about anthrax. First of all, it does live in the ground. It's a spore that lives in the ground. We know it occurs worldwide. We just don't know when it will pop up. It is based on weather conditions. It can be just a weather condition in that pasture. It can be along an area, but it's in typically very small areas that it does occur. When an animal has anthrax, they typically die within. So as previously mentioned, the cow that was moved from North Dakota to South Dakota to a livestock market, she died the day she arrived. They die within 24 hours. It's not something that they carry for a long period of time. The spread by flies can occur. It's very, very rare. Typically, it's localized to just one specific area, and it also is more common in a certain type of soil that exists as well. But the spread is very limited as long as you take that animal and destroy that carcass immediately. And by destroy, we mean bury that carcass or burn the carcass, preferably burn and bury. If you don't destroy the carcass immediately, those anthrax spores can go into the aerosolize or basically become embedded in that ground, and then it's there forever. So the main way to eliminate anthrax is to destroy that carcass as quickly as possible, right where it's at. So I just wanted to update you on a little bit of what anthrax is all about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one more comment. Dr. Hazel touched on it Tuesday in the previous testimony, and we understand Ms. Mickey's fears about folks maybe not reporting. In this case, there was a lot of cattle dying for a long time and nobody knew what was killing them. I know the folks in the area were talking about toxic weeds, toxic grasses. Vets were posting them. And we found out about it on Saturday of Labor Day weekend, about in the afternoon. And by Tuesday, we had a public meeting out there after it had been termed positive. So it's one of those things that I'm sorry it happened, but those folks are going to be pretty aware if they have any unusual or unexpected death in their livestock now, how they react to it. It's going to be different. That's a message we want to send all producers across the state as well. So, but there are penalties, criminal penalties in our animal health statutes for people who do not report a reportable disease. So that there is consequence if somebody doesn't report and they know. So if somebody was shipping in cattle that were dying off the truck, and their vet posted them, number one, they're gonna wanna know what happened because of their investment, but number two, at that point, then the report is either made or there's a consequence thereupon if they do not. So just so that's known, that's already in statute, been there for a long time, works for any of our reportable diseases. So I just wanted to make sure that the committee is aware of that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes. Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. one of the things that you just said was that if the carcass is destroyed within 24 hours, the amount of time that elapsed from when this situation started until it was figured out what it was quite a bit of time. And so is anthrax one of the things that's already in your protocol? Is it already identified as one of those things that needs to be handled and reported? What happened to the people that didn't report? And is there training going on to be able to identify it? Or is it just something that people are supposed to educate themselves on?
Chairman Winter,
Hazel.
Representative Ottman. So the anthrax was identified, as mentioned by Director True, we were not informed of this until the diagnostic lab made the diagnosis on the Saturday of Labor Day weekend. There had been cattle dying for a couple months in a couple of the premises, a few of the premises in that area. There were veterinarians involved. Unfortunately, nobody notified us until the diagnosis was made. We were not aware. The veterinarians in the area are now aware that anthrax occurs in that particular region. They understand what the clinical signs are. The diagnostic lab is aware. The owners are aware. We also have developed fact sheets that have been distributed to that region, so they are aware. And the main thing is that the animals die within 24 hours, and the goal is to get the carcasses buried as quickly as possible without opening that carcass. That's the goal. So if they can get buried in 24 hours, fantastic, but it's just as quickly as possible we'd like them to be buried. But the training has already occurred, and I might mention too that we developed a specific protocol strictly for anthrax reporting, and that's what you have. We already have protocol on our website and in our rules. We have protocol to respond for animal diseases or animal diseases in general. We created one specifically for anthrax, which is what you have before you. And this specific protocol addresses everything that is in this bill.
Thank you. Yes. Representative Schmid.
Yes, I was curious, you had mentioned it's a weather-related issue that kind of activates the anthrax. Is it a certain type of weather? Is it wet, extremely wet weather, dry weather?
Chairman
Dr. Hazel.
Chairman Winter, Representative Schmid. So that's an excellent question, and actually it's both. It's an unusual weather event. It can come so you have a tremendous drought and then a heavy rain, or heavy rain, then a tremendous drought. It's a combination of unusual weather that makes it occur. And in some areas, it is endemic. Like I said, in some areas it is endemic. They may just have a very short drought, or they may disturb the soil. If you have a soil disturbance, for example, if you're putting in a new foundation, something like that, and you disturb the soil, that can also cause it to come out of the dirt.
Representative Schmid.
Yes, and also, are the spores more in the surface, or are they leached, through the field to, depths?
Chairman Winter, Representative Schmid. And so also excellent question. And what happens is the actual spores are more in the root. So whenever cattle are grazing or livestock are grazing, if they get too close and pull up that root, the spores will be in that root. They won't be necessarily on the surface, they're below the ground. So and one of the points of that is if you're creating hay, if you're cutting hay on those pastures, as long as you're cutting hay and not mowing it too short, mowing it at an accurate level, hay is not a problem because that spore is more in that root than it is on the topsoil surface.
Yes, go ahead, Representative.
One last question. Is there any way that a landowner, and I know this might get expensive, but is there any way that a landowner that might suspect or is concerned of an anthrax issue be able to test any of the soil for that?
Chairman Winter, Representative Schmid. Also, I think you probably know the answer. Unfortunately, no, there is not a way to test for anthrax. There have been many methods tried. States have tried, ARS, NRCS, many different groups have tried, and there's just not been an accurate way to find it because it won't necessarily appear unless there's a disturbance or a weather event, it's very hard to find it year-round. So there was not a really accurate, efficient method to test for anthrax. About the only way that we can actually find it now or know areas that we maybe suspect there's a higher incidence is historical data.
Okay.
That's all we have.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, Representative Eklund.
So I think this has been answered, but it was in our interim study of this disease, I guess, when it broke out. How long was it, you mentioned Labor Day weekend, was it between when the first sample was sent in that the state lab got their determination, and then from the state lab, how long did it take for the health department to respond?
Dr. Hazel.
Chairman Nguyen and Representative Eklund. So samples had been taken by veterinarians in that area from around June, per se, and sent to diagnostic labs to try to figure out what was going on. But it was actually a sample that was collected by our diagnostic lab. That sample was collected on Ms. Minke could clarify this, on a Thursday, Friday, and the lab had results on Saturday. And then they had results on that Saturday. I was contacted Saturday afternoon around 3:30 in the afternoon. We immediately put a team together from the health department, Game and Fish, and the livestock board. We started making phone calls Saturday night. In fact, Ms. Minke family was one of the first phone calls we made on Saturday night. We contacted the rest of those that were impacted throughout the weekend, and we had a formal town meeting on Tuesday, keeping in mind that Monday was a holiday.
Any more
And that's
questions?
all the agencies together that had the meeting.
Well, thank you. Any more questions for from the committee? Okay, well, thank you very much for being here, and you might stick around a minute. Thank you. Are there any other agencies out there that would like to testify on this issue? Seeing none, how about public testimony? Anybody in the room would like to testify in favor of this bill? Yes, come ahead.
I agree, the response was outstanding when it was first found out. Dr. Browers came out and necropsied a cow on one of the neighboring ranches on Friday. She then came to our ranch and necropsied 2 of them. Sorry, Chairman Winters, I didn't address you. She then left our ranch like at 6:30 at night and went back to Laramie, put all of the samples, and got on her computer and started talking to all of her colleagues and come up with, of course, when she necropsied the calf, she said, wait a minute, this is not a plant toxin. And she recognized things that were gone. And so she then went down and then she called in her head lab tech, and they ran tests. And I do believe that the anthrax test takes 2 hours, and then they have to confirm it, and they have to notify the CDC in Atlanta. I think that Dr. Hazel will probably agree. And we got the first phone call Saturday afternoon, and we set up a teleconference call, and it was like at 2:40, something like that, that everybody was on the line. Nobody knew. This was a crash course. They did the best they could. I'm just asking for maybe future protection. And that they say that they can't do surveillance around. There's a contract, an agreement or whatever with Manitoba, Montana, North South Dakota, and Michigan, I believe. And a lot of what I see, that we've really educated ourselves. We have to. This is our livelihood. This is how we either make it or break it. And it's going to affect everybody else. So if we get everything out there, it's okay. but they have a quarantine area around in their contract for anthrax. They put a quarantine area around for bird flu. So I don't understand that comment, but the meeting, I do believe, was Wednesday night, not Tuesday night, because Tuesday night is the night that I was put in the hospital and I missed the meeting, and they came out there. And they did the best that they could. Our biggest concern is the surveillance and the bill that Representative Davis does allow for that. And I don't see why it's not possible. And thank you for your time and
Thank you, ma'am.
consideration.
Appreciate you being here. Mark, are there any people on Zoom? Okay. We will close public comment at this time. So what is the pleasure of the committee? Motion made to move the bill. Do we have a second? The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Take discussion on the bill. Discussion on the bill.
Okay. I guess we'll have discussion amongst ourselves here. Anyone have anything to comment on? Yes, Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, at our last meeting, we got some proposed amendments from the Livestock Board, and I did my best to try and address those and some issues from the producer, and came up with a new amendment. I don't have a copy of it because I give it out to the, and if the director wouldn't mind commenting on it. And I got that one. This one? Yep, that one. And I would propose adoption of this amendment, House Bill 90. This is
Okay,
up for
thank you.
discussion.
Director True.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Representative Davis, thank you for the amendment. I may have to try and read it in the way it's written. I think it's fairly close to what we did. I just want to point out a couple of the things that we had brought to Representative Davis that didn't fit, and add a piece to the amendment too, where he struck, deleted some language, I believe, about where in your section it says designated surveillance area. He struck that on our behalf because that's defined in rule with tight geographic borders related to brucellosis. So that he struck that, I appreciate that. I think did you strike non-negative everywhere it showed up, Representative Davis?
Mr. Chairman, we have to go line by line. We don't have the amendment,
Okay,
so we're gonna have to go line by line.
I'm just trying to make sure that all the brucellosis language is out.
Right,
from-
but we don't have it.
Okay, so there's language, and I'll do the line in just a second, but there's language about non-negative anthrax test that doesn't exist. It's either positive or negative. That's a brucellosis test only, where a non-negative result can turn back up to you. And I think that was it. That was our brucellosis questions. So if I could, now I'll try and do a line by line for you. I want to add to his amendment, if I can, on page 1, line 3.
Point
Non-
of order.
Yes.
I'm sorry. First off, we've got two different papers here. We have no idea what you're
You
talking
want
about.
me to wait for his to be passed out? Okay.
It's
Thank you.
passed out.
One with the red language.
That one.
Is that from you? Who passed that up?
It came from Representative,
Mark.
I gave you the mine, but
Mark did. The red line,
Is this the one that you are talking about? That's this one. That's one from Bob.
that's one from Bob. Mine was this one that I handed out to, you handed out to him the other day. And it's similar. I just haven't tried to read his into my, how the section.
Okay,
feel that again.
Yeah.
so you do have,
I have both at this time, but I want to add one line to his.
you do have both of them.
You have this one too?
Yes. go ahead,
So,
Director.
Mr. Chairman, on page 1, line 3, non-negative showed up again, and I hadn't seen that the first time when I wrote my amendment, so that would need to be stricken. That's another brucellosis. So I've just inserted the word positive there,
Page 1, line 3,
yes.
and what all do we scratch out?
Strike the non-negative, delete non-negative, and insert the word positive.
Are we clear on that, committee?
Mr.
Go
Chairman,
ahead.
may I just clarify? So we have, we have two amendments in front of us. We have an LSO amendment and then,
The one we offered.
and this is your amendment?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, are you going through both amendments?
I'm trying to compare the language as it reads out, but I'm referring to his, and I'm just adding a line where I think we both missed the phrase non-negative.
Okay, so is your intention to include both of these
No,
amendments?
no, it would probably be just to work with Representative Davis's.
With this amendment?
Yeah, I just was explaining the language reasons that
So,
we
and so
changed that.
what you just said is on, so what you are doing is you're taking this amendment and you're adding in page 1, line 3, to replace the word non-negative with
Yes,
positive.
ma'am. You're correct, ma'am. I'm sorry. I don't speak LSO very well, so I'll try and help you here.
Neither do we.
Thank you, Representative Davis, for that. So, Mr. Chairman, the only other comment I think I would make is, and we discussed this with Representative Davis, and maybe he'd want to change that, is area of concern is also a defined brucellosis description, maybe area of interest or area of observation.
And
would-
again, can
would
you
be
tell
better.
us which page? and which
That is
line?
that is his page, on page 2, line 6, and page 2, line 8, twice.
So where, you're saying where it says on page 2, line 6, now we are talking about the LSO amendment.
Yes, ma'am.
In, the amendment right now provides delete surveillance area and insert an area of concern shall be established. Can you tell me again what you are recommending?
My recommendation would be to strike concern, the word concern, and add interest or observation probably. Add the word observation.
And is that the only, and you have that on, also on page 2, line 8, is that the same?
Correct.
Yes, Representative Eklund?
So on the tail end of, on page 2, line 6, tail end of it, we have non-negative again. Do you want that changed to positive? I don't think it's in this amendment.
Director?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative
In
Davis.
the essence of time, I can work with the director and get a better to bring before on the first reading of the committee of the whole, if that pleased the board.
Is the committee satisfied with that proposal?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Well, let's do that. We'll, I guess, table this conversation right now. Representative Provenza.
Mr. Chairman, what we're doing, what the proposed motion, there's a motion on the table for the bill. What we're doing is not talking about the amendment anymore, and we're going to move on and we're going to vote on the bill. Representative Davis, if the bill makes it through committee, is going to then work on an amendment to do during committee of the whole from himself. So the recommendation is let's move on with the bill and deal with that language
Okay.
between him and the parties invested.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Representative.
and
Representative
also, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I think also we withdraw the amendment and then switch to the bill. So who's the mover of the amendment?
I don't think we moved the amendment.
Oh, I think we did. We did not. Okay.
Guess we don't have to. Nope. Okay, yes, Representative Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to explain that I'm going to be a no on this bill. I think it just is proven in the last 10 minutes of trying to fix and that it's just not ready. And I think we let the livestock board and the state vet do what they've continued to do. And they've said that they've developed a practice, and I don't think that this is ready for prime time and if we do it the wrong way, we might get in the way of their practices. So I am going to be a no on this bill.
Okay. Do we have a motion on the floor to?
We have to vote on the bill.
Yeah,
Question.
question been called for? All those in favor?
Roll call
We need
vote.
to, okay, let's have a roll call vote then.
We're voting on House Bill 90 as it is. We're going to deal with the amendments later, but Representative Banks,
No.
Representative Davis,
Aye?
Representative Eklund,
Aye.
Representative Johnson,
Aye.
Representative Ottman,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
No.
Representative Schmidt,
Aye.
Representative Strzok,
No.
Chairman Winter.
Aye.
Vote is 6 aye, 3 no. This would pass.
Okay, this bill is passed. We'll move on to the next bill. Next bill for our consideration will be House Bill 109. And we have Representative Allemand here to explain the bill. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be back in agriculture for just a little bit. I'm going to be quick because I know you're very pressed for time. This bill is HB 109, and it's a very simple little bill that has some very big ramifications to it. What this bill does, we need some way to stop trespass. What our current laws are now, if a person is stopped for trespass from shooting elk, deer, wildlife, it's $450. These trespassers are getting very aggressive, and some are getting violent. So we need to stop them some way, and I'm thinking this bill will do it. And it's a simple little bill, and all it does, if they are caught trespassing during hunting season or horn hunting or so forth, it's real simple. If they're found guilty, a judge shall take away their hunting rights for 2 years. And when that happens, they will also lose their hunting rights in, I believe it's 32 other states. The commission's here and they will know that fact. But all I'm trying to do is stop something that is getting out of hand. It's getting dangerous out in the hunting field right now. And this bill was brought to me by constituents, several, and asked me to run. Only law-breaking criminals will ever be charged for trespassing and lose their license for 2 years. I mean, if you don't trespass, you don't have the problem. And ranchers as a whole do not penalize somebody who makes a mistake and just kind of wanders, off and onto private land. And most people really have no excuse why they should wander onto private land because of our global technology with GPSs. And the GPSs are pretty much accurate within a couple feet. If something isn't done to curb this trespassing problem, I fear there will be shootouts and blood on the prairie. And then there's a new concept. If hunters would call the ranchers in the middle of the summer and ask them, can I help you fix some fence or something? I want to become your friend. I'll take you out to supper. It's pretty hard to tell a friend no. And that is the best way hunters can get onto private ground. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Does the committee have any questions for Representative Alman? Yes, Representative Schmidt.
Representative Allamand, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Allamand, is this, would this go into place for a first offense?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Representative Schmid. Yes. But like I said, ranchers, unless somebody's getting aggressive, they're not going to call the Game and Fish or their local sheriff. They're just going to ask people to leave. And maybe that's not every rancher, but it's every rancher I know. And so, yes, it will be first offense, but it will also probably not be.
Okay. Representative Davis.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative, you know, we were discussing and had a bill the other day about fence lines not being online. So how so we have to, if we don't have cell phone service, we have to make sure where we're at, and usually we go down a fence line, and if that fence line is not online, how would you address something like that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Davis, most fence lines are on both private, federal, and state in our area. Most places, your GPS does work because it goes off a satellite. So that's really would not be a very good excuse.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, there's two sides of the state, east and west. We don't have cell coverage so great in the west. I beg to differ with you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, I'm not talking about cell phone, I'm talking about satellite. And if you can see the sky, you can probably usually get a satellite.
Okay. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Alman, can you show me on your phone how to look up satellite? Do you have Onyx?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Do you want to see that?
Does every
It will not
constituent in
work.
your district have Onyx?
It is on X, and it will not work down here in the basement. If I got up on the lawn, it would work, but there's very little cell service here.
Mr. Chairman,
Follow up.
how much money does Onyx cost? And then what if you don't have potentially a device for that? My husband doesn't have a smartphone. He carries a candy phone, is what I call it. I guess my concern, Representative Alman, is that in our Title 23 statutes, intent is not something that you have to violate the law. Our hunters are expected to have a different onus in whether they're violating a law or not. So if you're hunting and you, by all intentions, you're following fence line, but you don't happen to have Onyx or you don't have GPS, which is not something that everybody has, then by stepping on land that is not yours, you have broken the law. And the concern then is it's a different onus than our Title VI where intent is necessary. So our hunters who have a constitutional right to hunt, who are trying their best and they think they're following the law, are found that they stepped on private land, now don't get to hunt for 2 years. That's my concern. So when you say everyone has Onyx, and I'm glad you have Onyx Hunt, I have Onyx Hunt, but I have constituents, my husband included, who doesn't have a smartphone. He has a candy phone. So what do we do about those folks? Because they have the constitutional right to hunt.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Provenza, you're right, they do. Everybody has a right to hunt as long as they can legally own a firearm and have not broke the state's laws. Hunting is not a cheap sport, even for locals, and Onyx Hunt costs almost nothing. I forget what I pay. It just comes out of my bank account, but it's very little. I don't even notice it's come. So, and regular GPSs are not that expensive anymore either, and they're a little more accurate than Onyx Hunt.
Any more questions? Yes. Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, I've had quite a few constituents call and say, yes, trespass, trespass. Their landowners are very against this. Like you said, it's becoming quite a problem. But the other thing is, as you said, if we put this into law and make it a law, and then landowners can decide whether they're going to enforce it or not, that doesn't seem quite right.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, what's not right is people trespassing. And if they do it by mistake, that's one thing. But these trespassers, like I said, are getting aggressive. They're getting violent. I know of 2 cases in the last 2 years where the landowner thought there was going to be a pistol pulled on them. We need to stop this. And this is about the only way I could come up with that would do it. Some of my constituents wanted me to take their vehicle and their rifle and everything else, and I said, no, that's not right. This penalizes people for making bad judgment and decisions, and like I've said before, unless these people are aggressive, they're probably going to walk away with the rancher telling them, please leave or come back or whatever.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so do you know with these cases, is it primarily local people or out of state? And also, would it be possible to, you said the fine was $450. Would that be something that we might look at increasing that rather than the loss of privilege for 2 years?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative.
Representative Ottman, thank you. The people are local. There are very few out-of-state people are causing this problem. It's mainly local people. And some of these trophy hunts cost a lot of money, and they're on private land. And the trespasser does it on purpose because he wants that trophy bull elk. And $1,000 does not bother him. $2,000 does not bother him. Having his license taken away for 2 years really bothers him. Thank you.
Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious where you're getting the $450 fine from. A low misdemeanor in Title 23 is $1,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Provenza, I talked to the agency in the hall earlier, and that's what they told me the fine was. I thought it was lower than that, but the agency this morning told me it was $450.
Was it the Game and Fish?
Which agency?
Yes.
Okay, any more questions for Representative Alaman? Yes, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Allemon, I understand what you're saying. As a hunter, an avid hunter, hunters are supposed to know where they're at. And if they don't know where they're at and they have a question, should I or shouldn't I, they probably shouldn't. That's what a hunter does, a real hunter. I just think the penalty for a first-time offense is a little stiff. Because it sounds like there's some localized issues here to me, and I know those happen around the state. But there's going to be instances, I think, where, maybe some young kids or new hunters or something might, they don't have it all together yet. And they step onto something, get caught, and they lose hunting privileges for 2 years. I think is a little rough. So I don't have a problem with the bill. I just think the first offense is a little stiff for somebody that's completely innocent, or an innocent mistake.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schmidt, what would you suggest? Because on first offense, on these egregious trespassers, they're going to trespass, and they could get in a firearm shootout with you. And very few ranchers would ever trespass some kids that made a mistake or anybody who made a mistake. My constituents are after these egregious people, and they want them stopped. And this is the only way we figured out how we could. And first offense, do you have a suggestion for first offense?
Representative Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to play this over here a little bit and see where we can kind of go with this. Representative, what would you say of if we put into this piece of legislation somehow a first offense, they are subject to the $1,000 misdemeanor, and second offense would result in the loss of hunting privileges?
Representative Alaman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Banks. That's not going to stop our problem now, but I would look at that as a friendly amendment, and I would back that.
Any more questions for Representative Alaman? Yes, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Alamand, I think that what Representative Banks has offered is a good start. I mean, the problem's been here for a while, but we have to start somewhere. And I think that's probably the right way to start your proposal. Thank you.
Yes, Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I found the fines and sentences penalties in our game and fish statutes, Representative Alaman. It's up to $1,000 and 6 months of imprisonment if you have a misdemeanor offense in our game and fish statute. So $1,000, 6 months. Just a consideration there.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would go for that very easily as long as we kept the word shall in there. Because if we put may back in, it's very hard to even get judges to look at trespass. If we keep the word shall, I would be very happy with that.
Representative?
The other clarification too is that the court can also do a 3-year suspension of your privileges as well. So I think the law is already doing what Representative Alaman is suggesting. It's just a matter of, calling and having things done about it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, it's not. Because if this law would work, we wouldn't have the problem today. And if we keep the word shall instead of may, and I wouldn't say shall on the 6 months of prison time, I would say the shall on the $1,000 first offense, and then 2-year suspension on second offense. Both would be shall.
Okay, yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The concern, though, is our laws across all of our green books, we give discretion to judges. And if we carve this out and we tell judges, this is what you have to do, and start inserting minimum penalties, then it's not consistent with the rest of our green books. It's potentially unnecessarily burdensome on hunters who already don't have to have intent. If you accidentally step on private land right now, you can face a $1,000 fine and 6 months in prison.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Representative Provenza, yeah, you're right, but it doesn't happen. These trespassers don't go to court because no one's pushing them to go to court. And the agency, I believe, is going to testify, and I'm not sure that that's what they'll testify to because they know the law a lot better than I do. But we need something different than what we have now, because what we have now is failing, and it's failing our hunters because ranchers aren't wanting people to come out hunting because they're cutting padlocks. They're cutting fences. They're throwing trash out. And that's not the good hunters. That is the egregious hunters that this bill's trying to stop.
Any more questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any agencies out there that would care to testify? Game and Fish, please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Dan Smith. I'm the Chief Game Warden for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. I also have with me today Matt Withroder, who's the Regional Wildlife Supervisor in the Laramie region. So hopefully I can address some of the questions that have already come up as I go through this. And so this bill, as you already know, would result in the loss of a hunting, fishing, trapping license privileges for 2 years. And as it's written in the bill, from the date of the violation, in addition to other penalties. And so as has been brought up before, there's basically, in my world, there's two different types of trespass. There's criminal trespass, which Game and Fish doesn't have the authority to enforce. And then there's hunting trespass. With criminal trespass, you basically have to be notified. You either have to have a sign, somebody has to tell you you're trespassing, you have to have intent to trespass, and you have to have knowledge that you're doing it. In hunting trespass, it's a strict liability on the sportsman. As Representative Provenza said, if a sportsman steps onto private property, under the hunting trespass law, they're in violation. So currently, the penalty for game and fish trespass, as has already been mentioned, it's a low misdemeanor, up to $1,000 and up to 6 months in jail. The bond schedule from the Wyoming Supreme Court right now has that bond at $450. If they go and appear in court, then the judge has the ability and to use his discretion to bring that up to $1,000, however he wants to do it. And as also been already mentioned, he also has the ability to suspend a license up to 3 years. That license, if it's suspended in Wyoming, also will be suspended in all, there's, I believe, 48 other states in the Interstate Wildlife Compact, that they would also be suspended in those states. So suspending them here on that first offense would basically suspend them nationwide. We don't have the authority right now to suspend somebody in the field on the time of violation. That does have to go through a court process, and that's left up to a judge. So this bill does take away the ability for law enforcement to use any discretion in the field, as you've noted. It's under a shell trespass. And so if we are called out to respond to a call, it's a shall suspend. So it would have to have the Wyoming Supreme Court also change the bondable offense to a must appear so that it could go through the court process so that a judge could suspend them. You know, it does take away a lot of discretion from game wardens then. So if you have a 14-year-old kid that's gonna go out fishing on his own, he rides his bicycle down to a public access area, starts fishing, and he's working his way down the bank, suddenly he's on somebody's private property, no fence, nothing that's notified him, and then he gets an upset landowner. Most times, I think Representative Alleman is correct, the landowner would just tell him to move on. But in some cases, maybe the landowner's just tired of people doing that, and that poor 14-year-old is the one that's ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so now, he calls Game and Fish, I want this person trespassed, now we have an issue of we just revoked a kid for 2 years for fishing on private property where he didn't have permission. As far as the fence itself, you know, the current penalty does allow for suspension of licenses up to 3 years. Also, if we do have somebody that's trespassing and harvesting a big bull elk or something, we seize that animal so they don't get it back. If we can convict them of trespassing, then we do seize that animal. We don't seize guns and vehicles, but in this particular case, but we do take the animal that they harvested illegally. We may, you know, there's most landowners, I think Representative Alleman is spot on. They're just gonna ask you to move on. Other cases, landowners are gonna use this to their advantage. If you're tired of people trespassing on your property, if under this law, all I have to do is call the Game and Fish and I can make sure that this person's not gonna hunt for the next 2 years. I think that takes a lot of discretion away from the courts. It takes a lot of discretion away from the game warden. In closing, I would say that I think our current penalties in place can address this. Over the last 2 years, I did run a couple numbers here. Over the 23 and 24 hunting seasons, there were a total of 405 trespass violations that were documented, resulted in 201 citations, 188 warnings, and 16 instances where we just couldn't locate the suspect. We couldn't get there fast enough. So I do think our current law is working. It gives a lot of discretion to the wardens, a lot of discretion to the court, and does still allow the ability to suspend a repeat offender for up to 3 years. And with that, I would stand for questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Schmidt.
Chief Smith, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Smith, do you know how many times that, you've caught an offender and they've got into the court system and the court system has actually taken it to the limit, $1,000 fine and removal of the license for 3 years?
I don't have that number. We were just discussing that beforehand. In the number of years that I've been a game warden, it's very rare that you catch the same person again. Usually the $450 fine, and maybe we're just not catching them all, right? That could be the case. But it's rare to catch a repeat offender. The repeat offenders that I have caught, we've got them to where they can't come back onto those properties. We've worked the system the best that we can to make sure that they don't repeat the offense.
Thank you.
Yes. Any more questions? Representative Banks?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, just out of curiosity, how would we go about increasing that $450, getting it maybe jumped up higher just to have kind of more of a deterrence there?
So, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
My apologies. Representative Banks, currently, the bond schedule is set by the Wyoming Supreme Court. So they look at all violations across the state, they set a bond schedule. And then with the bond schedule, that allows you to write somebody a citation and just release them. They can pay that bond and not have to appear in court. If it's more egregious or a repeat offender, then we just mark on the citation that they must appear in court, and then it's at the discretion of the judge up to $1,000. We can make recommendations, but ultimately the judge has the final say.
Any more questions? Seeing none? Did you have anything to offer? Okay, well, thank you for coming. Oh, Representative Eklund.
Mr. Chairman, so if we were to pass this bill, we would could reduce the amount of time that a licensed hunting privileges could be suspended. Am I right on that? Because the law says 3 years as a maximum penalty, and this says 2 years. Got a little difference with that shall in there, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because,
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund, so I'm not an attorney, but here's my shot at it. I think under this, the shall, they would have to have a minimum of 2 years. I would think that the judge still could use the discretion to up that to 3 years if he chose to, based on the other statute. So it would be, if passed, I would think it would be a minimum of the 2 years under the shall, and then the potential for an additional year.
Any more questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Any more agencies out there would like to testify? Okay, I guess we'll go to public testimony. Anyone in the room like to testify? Yeah. Oh, and folks, we're gonna give you, what, 2 minutes? 2 minutes to respond to in your testimonies.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jess Johnson, Wyoming Wildlife Federation. We stand pretty strongly opposed to this bill, in part because of what you heard from the department and how much we already have sort of on the books. and the scale at which we can be sort of on the hook for without even intent to trespass. The part that I think I have the largest problem with is how rigid this is it comes right out of the gate with something and says, shall, it's gonna be this, it's gonna be this. It doesn't leave the warden discretion for those situations where you have the 14-year-old versus the situation where you have an egregious offender that does actually deserve sort of the full brunt of the law. The other sides of this, you know, I hear the sponsors' angst here, and there are bad behaviors. We know that. There's bad behaviors on the landowner side, there's bad behaviors on the hunting side, and we all do our best to keep our bad apples from spoiling the whole barrel. But this sort of behavior, I would also say, is if they're feeling threatened and they're being threatened, that is a different law that's being violated there, not hunting trespass. That is going into something else. So when we're looking at hunting trespass, there is no intent. You guys, I can tell you, I'm going to say, as a hunter, as someone who spends most of September and October in the field, I am so scared of this law. I have OnX on and I have the tracking feature on so that I can prove where I have been and how I've been behaving, because I am terrified of accidentally stepping over that line without intent, without something that I want to do. But it comes right out of the gate at you. It's $450. That's a pretty stiff fine right out of the gate as well, especially for a kid that's going to be dealing with this. So I would just say we stand pretty opposed to this. I would say extremely opposed to this. I think there's a really great situation already in place. Our wardens are incredible. That discretion that they have needs to be kept with them. And the egregious offenders, we as hunters, we need to be better about calling out the bad behavior and making sure we keep each other in line.
Are there any questions for Ms. Johnson? Okay, how about you? You have some comments?
Chairman, members of the committee, Josh Metton, Wyoming Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Just echoing previous comments on the concerns about the extreme nature of this bill. As an adult onset hunter, I'm going to throw myself under the bus here. My first time ever elk hunting, I was driving around in an ATV with a loaded gun in a soft scabbard, which if you're in Wyoming, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're in our state to the south, that's enough fines to get you kicked out from elk hunting for quite a while. And I was excited, didn't even realize about the issue. And fortunately, the warden that cited me recognized that I was a brand new hunter and gave me some slack. And I think that's where this, like, the ability for a warden to have discretion. I actually, a year ago, I was up in Sunlight Basin and hunting with a buddy, and he had his hood up over his blaze orange hat, and this warden, your son actually, came up to us and was like, "Hey, you're in violation of the blaze orange law." But fortunately, because he has discretion, it was an unintentional thing, and they let it slide. And I think that's one of the really important things with especially with hunting, is there's so many violations and things that we need to be able to have discretion and recognize when people are making honest mistakes. I also am paranoid about accidentally trespassing, and I also don't want to be staring at my phone the entire time that I'm walking around the woods, trying to make sure that I'm not accidentally crossing a line, especially if I'm right on the edge of a private parcel. And as the Representative Davis mentioned earlier, we know that there's a lot of fence lines that don't reflect the private property line, so we can't actually, that's something that we can't really trust. So I ask you to vote no on this bill. I'll stand for questions.
Okay, any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here and your comments. Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I think one thing this bill does is it shows the problem that we have, and I will agree, it's the minority of hunters. It's a very small minority. And I think one of the frustrations I hear from my members throughout the state is getting it prosecuted. actually getting something done. I think that's getting, I don't know if I want to use the word better, is getting less bad, as a Game and Fish, indicated. They're doing a lot of, 200 people getting fined for that. That's good. I'm glad they're getting it prosecuted, but the frustration that comes, and again, I think it's getting less bad, was actually getting it prosecuted. We've been working on this issue for a long time, and we've never gotten an answer on why. First, you have to catch them. The second, somebody has to write them a ticket, and then you have to go to court. And there's been instances that just nothing's happened. And some of my members, they've just kind of given up. And so I think the Game and Fish being more active on this has been a help. I'll relay a story from one of my members that he contacted a Game and Fish official that's now retired, and the new one helps him out a lot more, but couldn't get any help, couldn't get him to come out. That's gotten better with a different warden. I have to say that, but then when the county sheriff says, well, I'm not going to prosecute somebody until I catch him 3 times, that's an issue. And how to alleviate that, I think, is beyond the realms of this. But I think this bill, perhaps for a first offense, might be, to lose it for that long might be a little bit too much. But in reading and learning what the current situation is, that perhaps we need the encouragement of the courts to go farther, to take it farther, make people, I hate to use the word make an example out of them, but I think maybe that's, I guess I don't have a good solution for you, but I think this bill is perhaps a little too strong, but I'd still like to see it go forward with that. Mr. Chairman, I'd sit for any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you for your comments. Yes, Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moline, thanks for being here today. You said that the sheriff prosecutes, so is that the way it works? Landowner contacts the sheriff's department or Game and Fish, or how does that work?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, this situation was a few years ago, and I think it's been alleviated by getting a more aggressive warden to enforce the laws. But this, my member had a meeting with the Game and Fish and the sheriff's department, and the sheriff said, I'm not going to prosecute until I catch him 3 times. And this was a few years ago. I believe that gentleman is still in office, but my frustration on this is an issue we've been working on for years, and I think we're going in the right direction. And I will say, I understand the Game and Fish can't be everywhere, because a lot of times that's who has to catch them. A lot of times they're in and out before the landowner even knows. You see the tracks or the gut pile, but they're gone before you even know it. So, but that's what was related to me by one of my members.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. Any more public comment out there? Okay. How about online?
Yes, Sabrina King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sabrina King, and I am here representing the Wyoming chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We also stand in strong opposition to this bill, and I wanted to just give a couple of additional points for the committee to consider. The first is that we actually strengthened this specific law 2 years ago. So addressing the issue of trespass is not something that we have been sitting down on, and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers actually stood very strongly in supporting that bill and ensuring that the hunter trespass statute is as strong as it could possibly be. Our opposition to this bill really does rest on the reality of hunting and fishing and trapping as a constitutional right and not taking that lightly, and taking away that right for a misdemeanor charge automatically, when, as has been pointed out, under the hunter trespass statute, the onus is on the hunter to know where they are. So you can get a misdemeanor charge for making a mistake and having your hunting rights taken away from that for a mistake. I just don't think that's how we do things in Wyoming. And I think, that the sponsor of the bill said, well, we can't take away their vehicle or their rifle. That's too much of a penalty. You don't get your gun rights taken away without a felony because having a gun is a constitutional right. So if that is the case, then an automatic taking of your right to hunt is too high of a penalty. And the other thing that I will just say is the way that we know that the courts and laws work is that if the penalty is too high for the crime, it actually makes it less likely that that crime will be prosecuted. So I think the reality, and I think, to the previous speaker's point, if the problem is that trespass is not being prosecuted properly, honestly, making it an automatic revocation of your hunting rights is probably going to make it even less likely that people, especially on a first time, at the first time that they trespass, it makes it less likely that they're going to be prosecuted because the courts are going to look at this and say for a mistake and they're going to lose their hunting rights across the country for 2 years, that's too high of a penalty. So I think the committee should also consider the unintended consequences of putting this into statute and just recognizing the reality that if you are convicted of hunting trespass, your right to hunt can be taken away instantly already for that year and up to 3 years. So I think this bill has some unintended consequences. I think it goes much too far. And we should absolutely consider other ways to continue addressing the issue of trespass. It is offensive to hunters when other hunters trespass, and we are absolutely with landowners and ensuring that that doesn't happen. But this bill is the wrong way to go about it.
Thank you, Ms. King. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. King? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here and your testimony.
Thank you.
Who's next?
John Bird.
Welcome, Mr. Bird.
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to be here this morning. First of all, my name is John Bird. I was past president of Wyoming Sportsman Association in the 90s. I'm a fifth generation Wyoming person. Our family homesteaded out on the Poison Spider in central Wyoming. And I work with a lot of the ranchers and are friends with a lot of them. 2 years ago, I buried 300 cows for one of them at my own cost. I went and hired an excavator and did it. But we talk about trespassers, and we see it on the ranches that I hunt. And I'm asked by the ranchers, to keep an eye out for trespassers. Well, most of the trespassers I run into are people, a lot of them are non-residents, say, well, the fence line is there. You go, well, this is Wyoming. That fence line doesn't necessarily mean anything because most of those fences were put up to designate pastures and not on property lines. And the other thing is they get across, and if you confront them, where I normally do, because I've been asked to by the landowners, they say, oh, I screwed up. I won't do it again. And they leave. And for the most part, you don't see them. Yes, you do see some that come back. And those are the ones that we take video of and license plates and let the game warden know and give him the video so he has the information on it. But this bill in itself is so harsh. This is beyond Wyoming. To give a first offender that does it by accident, under the new statute, all he has to do is step on the property, whether he does it by accident or not. I've watched him out with a herd of elk trying to figure out if they can shoot it or not. Get a range, look at their GPS, get a range, look at their GPS, back and forth, and pretty soon the elk run off. It's easy to do. It's most of us, I carry 2 Onyx in my Ranger and on me when I hunt. And most people do, but I run into a lot of young people that can't afford a GPS. Heck, they barely afford the gas to get out there to hunt, and they live on that wild meat throughout the rest of the year. And those are the ones I'm concerned with. People like me, yeah, we can afford it, but I'm concerned about the young people, that can't, and they accidentally, and then they lose their hunting privileges, and 49 other states do it too. I run into more out-of-staters, I think, than I do locals that trespass, and they're the ones that really don't understand. And this is really going to affect them because it's going to take away their hunting rights, not only in Wyoming, but their home states and any other place they want to go hunting. It's just too harsh. Right now, the judge can fine you up to $750. Well, you can fine up to $1,000. The general rule is $750. The Game and Fish can write you a ticket and you can bond out for $450. But on a second and third offense, the judge has the alternative to suspend your license. And in Natrona County, he typically does on your second or third offense. You're going to lose your hunting privileges. So is this bill necessary? I don't think so. And I think the language in it, the shall, it takes too much away from our judges to make a decision on anything. And I'm firmly against this.
I'm going to have to cut you off there, but thank you for your testimony. Do you have any questions for Mr. Byrd from the committee? See none. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
I guess that's the end of the Zoom callers. Go ahead, Representative Eklund.
Mr. Chairman, may I bring our, probably our chief game warden up, ask a question or two, because I'm unclear on the statute as it is. So this question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
This question is addressing the statute. It seems to me that we already have in place a portion of the statute that could be up to $10,000. And we didn't address that. And I'm curious why what we've got here addresses Roman or V, and previous to that, there's a statute under this same crime that could be up to $10,000. And I'm curious why you may not have looked at that very well, and it might be an unfair question, but I'm trying to tie the statutes together. It looks like we've already got quite a hammer with a may instead of a shall.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Smith, can you respond to that, please?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund. So for a high misdemeanor, it's up to $10,000. For a low misdemeanor, it's up to $1,000. And that's in Wyoming statute 23-622.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. So if a person is out there trespassing, and what would distinguish the two? I'm curious, is it the number of times they've trespassed, vandalism? I'm not sure what makes that difference.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so in the statute for trespass, it states right in there that it's a low misdemeanor. And so that's what puts it into that low misdemeanor category. And that's 23, I think it's 305. I believe that's 23-305, but let me double check that. And so I believe that's where the hunting trespass is. I believe further in the statutes, it says that if it's not listed as a high misdemeanor in the statute, my correction. So in 23-305B, it does say the violation of this constitutes a low misdemeanor.
Okay. Any more questions for Mr. Smith or his compadre there? Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up. To address Representative Allenman's frustration and the whole purpose for this bill, what is the best way to go? Are you saying that enforcement's already happening and it's being ramped up, especially with notice or media possibly? Or is there something that can be adjusted that would complement it and make it more helpful?
Mr. Chairman?
Smith, go ahead.
Representative Ottman, so based on the last 2 years, we had about 400 incidences of trespass that we either wrote a citation for or wrote a written warning for. So it's a pretty large number when you think of all the different crimes that could happen for game and fish. The fact that we identified and actually wrote paper on 400 incidents of it, I think we have the tools in the toolbox to address the penalties. I think the tools are there, trying to get judges to prosecute that more on repeat offenders. In fairness, if you're gonna be an offender, you're gonna be an offender, and it's hard to catch those. They figure out, if I do this, I'm gonna get caught, and if I do this, I'm gonna get caught. So they work harder and harder to figure out how not to get caught, which is true across all crimes. If you're good at being a criminal, then you're good at being a criminal. And so, but when we do catch those, that's when we wanna use the courts to the maximum amount that we can and try to get that suspension of licenses.
Okay, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Smith, that individual you just described, sounds like he'd make a great game warden.
Any more questions? Thank you very much for being here. Any more public comment? Okay, seeing none. What's the pleasure of the committee? Okay, I will close public comment. So what would you folks like to do?
We don't have to. So then that bill would die without the lack of motion.
Okay. Since we don't have a motion, I guess that this bill will die in committee. Our next bill for consideration will be House Bill 243. I guess I'm up.
Representative Winter, welcome to the Ag Committee.
Thank you, Representative Banks. I would, let's see, do I have to move this thing?
I think you can just go right into it.
Okay, thank you. This, I bring to you House Bill 243, Dangerous Practice Act. This bill has been before the legislature now for several years, and it finally got to my committee. So I'm gonna try to do the best I can for this individual. He's one of my constituents, and he currently works for a dentist in Worland, and I happen to have some false teeth that he provided for me. But in a way, this act is relating to professions and occupations, amending licensing statutes for dentists and dental hygienists to include denturists, authorizing a denturist to be added to the Board of Dental Examiners as specified, and specifying that this act does not apply to denturity students performing denturity as part of their curriculum, specifying that denturists shall only perform dental laboratory work at the direction of a dentist, requiring dentists and dental laboratory technicians to complete work for a dentist pursuant to a written prescription as specified, requiring dentists and denturists to engage the services of the persons outside their office with a written work authorization. And the bill goes on here, putting the term denturist into the statute as it was set up. And so, and then there's one other thing that according to the LSO, they figured that it should cost a little more than $18,000. So there's an amendment to extend that to $22,000. So I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions for the good chairman?
Mr. Vice
Representative
Chairman, so this $18,000 estimated cost, is that every year that it costs to have this in the statute or to license the denturist? Or is that just a one-time deal?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund, this is to get it all set up, is my understanding, with the dental board and whatnot. So, are there any other questions?
Representative Eklund.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, so if we pass this, it makes it legal for denturists to operate instead of operating illegally, which they're presently probably doing. I think that's why the bill's before us. Am I correct?
Well, I don't think they're doing anything illegal. This particular individual works for a dentist in Worland.
Okay.
And they're pretty reputable, so I don't think that's a problem. But we do have some other comments from folks in the audience to explain that.
Further questions? Thank you, Representative. Any agencies in the room or other representatives or legislators that'd like to comment? Please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Emily Cronbaugh. I'm the Executive Director for the Board of Dental Examiners. I just had a few points of clarification on this bill, if you would indulge me. There's two specific items that we have a little confusion on, should we be implementing this bill. The first would be on page 12, lines 17 through 20. And specifically starting line 15, it names to me 3 different examinations. So the examination established by the Denturist Association or other board-approved exam, and then the second exam, a clinical exam, and then the third examination, a written. In my research, I cannot find that the National Denturist Association offers an examination. And when I checked the 6 other states that license denturists, they require a clinical and a written exam, and I can't find anybody else requires the National Denturist Association test. So I wasn't sure what the intent there was, or perhaps if the opinion is I'm misreading this. If you look at page 13, lines 6 through 12, that is then referring to 2 different exams. So I wasn't sure if this was conflicting with itself or if there was just a misunderstanding with the National Denturist Association test. The second item of clarification, or something I'd like to point out, is on page 17, lines 8 through 12. This is adding dental hygienist and a denturist to the definition of dentistry. Presently, this is the definition of dentistry, which allows a dentist to examine, diagnose, treat, plan, and care for the conditions within the human oral cavity and its adjacent tissues and structures. And it is my understanding that a dental hygienist and a denturist are not trained for that full scope of that definition. So I'm not sure what the intent there was, but that is a concern if the intent was to expand the scope of both dental hygiene and a denturist.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you answer briefly for me what the training is that a dentist has to get in comparison to a hygienist and a denturist? Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, a dentist goes through a dental school. They have different training than a hygienist who goes through a dental hygiene program. They're both accredited by the same national organization. They're taught different scopes. So a hygienist is taught a hygienist, I'm sorry if I misspeak, I do have a note. They are collaborating with dentists on diagnoses, but they are not taught to render a final diagnosis. And from what I can see on the Denturists Association's website, they aren't taught either of those things. Not sure if that helps.
All right, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just back to that definition of dentistry, there's several other sections that allude to the training. For example, page 10, line 20, that alludes to denturists and hygienists performing only what they are trained to do in their education programs, which does seem to conflict with the content on page 17.
And where at on page 10?
Page 10, line 20.
Okay. And you're okay with this language on page 10?
It is Mr. Chairman, it is consistent with how hygiene is currently regulated.
Thank you.
Those are my specific points, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further public testimony? Gentlemen?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Nicholas Segopian. I represent the Wyoming Dental Association. We're here today in opposition to this bill. With me today is Dr. Brad Kinchlow. Dr. Kinchlow is a practicing dentist here in the Cheyenne area. He's a Cheyenne native. He's currently the chairman of the Wyoming Dental Association Legal and Legislative Affairs Committee, and is a former member of the Laramie County Public Health Board and former president of the Wyoming Dental Association. So I'll let him offer some testimony, and I may offer some as well.
Go ahead, sir.
It is. We're good. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Brad Kinchlow. I'm a Wyoming native. I'm a third-generation dentist, and I've been fortunate enough to practice in Cheyenne for the past 23 years. I am here on behalf of the Wyoming Dental Association to speak against House Bill 243. Simply put, some current wording in this bill gives denturists who have an 18-month associate's degree from a non-accredited technical college the same abilities to treat patients as a dentist who has undergone 4 years of postgraduate medical and dental training. That is listed in page 6, line 4. In licensure certificate, each dentist and denturist licensed to practice dentistry in the state. These programs are not the same. Denturism is defined as someone who can make, fit, and repair full and partial dentures. We believe they are not properly trained, nor do they have the ability to examine, diagnose a patient because they cannot take any radiographs to identify or evaluate underlying bone. They cannot diagnose oral pathology. They cannot prepare teeth or oral tissues for removable, full, or partial dentures. All of these things are necessary for proper fit and form. These things can only be completed by a licensed dental professional. What a denturist is qualified to do is already being done. Dental assistants and dental lab technicians have worked alongside dentists for decades. After the dentist has properly examined hard and soft tissues, treatment planned, and performed any irreversible modifications of teeth or tissues for a proper denture fabrication, a dental assistant may acquire necessary information and records to begin fabrication for removable dentures under the supervision of a dentist. The dental lab technician then takes these records and information and fabricates the removable full or partial denture at the request of a written prescription of the dentist. This relationship has worked for decades. Dental assistants, dental lab technicians, and denturists are not dental professionals. They cannot diagnose or provide dental treatment. They can assist the dentist in providing these things. If they are not recognized as a dental professional, they should not have any right to oversee the dental profession as a member on the Wyoming Board of Dental Examiners. The topic of denturism is a special interest of one denturist in Wyoming, who has continued to bring different variations of this bill for over 16 years. I've been here to testify for 16 of those. I know it's gone longer than that.
Thank you, Dr. Kinchlow. Appreciate your testimony today. Any questions for Dr. Kinchlow? Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recently started my new year off with getting all 4 of my wisdom teeth taken out. Yes, it was a great day for all. But I was put under anesthesia to have my wisdom teeth removed. Would that be something that a denturist could do under this bill?
The way the wording currently states is the practice of dentistry. Being sedated is a separate licensure within that. So I would say at this point, no, sedation is not.
Further questions? Representative Ecklund.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So I've been around and listened to this bill a bit too, and I'd like to put it away. I doubt if it's just one denturist, but we hear it, and we'd like to fix things, solve problems. Is there any way with this as a framework or a backbone, can we put the issue to rest with legislation? Because I think what it does maybe is just allows denturists, how would I put this? It adds value to our denturists in Wyoming. And is there a way of fixing this bill so that we can never see it again?
Doctor.
It is my personal opinion that I'm not sure that it will be accepted until denturism has what it's continued to ask for, which is a seat on the Board of Dental Examiners. Everything that a denturism can provide and can do is already being done by a dental lab technician. The denturist in question has been working for a dental office, working hand in hand, providing the services that they provide. I don't understand why there needs to be a carve out or a designation with the financial impact that comes with it that is completely unrecoverable. There's no way the state of Wyoming can continue to have those annual costs and have enough denturists present in the state to be able to recover that cost through fees or applications or permits, et cetera.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate your testimony being here today.
Thank you for your time.
Mr. Gopian, did you have anything to add?
I don't have anything to add at this time, Dr. Kinchlow's testimony.
Thank you. Further testimony in the room? Okay, we'll go to virtual land. Any testimony online?
Sorry, Gary Volan?
Okay, Mr. Volan? Go ahead and unmute yourself, Mr. Volan, and proceed.
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Oh, thank you. My name's Gary Boland. I'm a denturist and graduate of the University of Wyoming. I'm licensed as a denturist through Oregon State, and I represent the Wyoming State Denturist Association. The denturist program is regulated in 6 states to include Montana, Idaho, and Washington, Oregon, and along with Arizona and Maine. Through House Bill 243, I'm requesting recognition and regulation through the Wyoming State Dental Board, so graduates of our denturist colleges can work in Wyoming, providing the same services I provide to the 4 dentists I work with in Worland. The same principles are used by the dental hygienist profession, outlined in House Bill 243 for the denturist profession, it's been working fine. We just need recognition and regulation through the Wyoming State Dental Board. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Volan. Any questions? No questions. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
No more public testimony. One more chance. Anybody in the room? Okay, with that, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure with Bill 243? Not hearing a motion, this bill would die for lack of a motion. Representative Eklund.
So I always like to solve problems, and the Ag Committee's really good at it. But if our health committees that usually see this couldn't fix this thing, then, and I think it's working off of a framework of other states that are entirely different, and I don't know how to fix it. I'd love to solve the problem today so I don't have to see the bill again. And other members that are new, believe me, it just kind of, the work piles up as you don't solve problems, and we probably just can't solve this problem today. I'm sorry about that.
Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 304. Another one of our good members.
I would have made the motion, but I can't do it as the chairman. Because I thought we could fix it. Got some ideas, let me know.
Mr. Chairman, I bring to you House Bill 304. And this, unlike the last two, I think we can solve the problem. It's fairly brief, and I'll explain why it's before us. In statute on state lands, the jurisdiction of those state lands can be determined by our Board of Commissioners. And these land commissioners have laws in place that prohibits, maybe not in all places, but has a great deal of our cultivated cropland on state lands as non-hunting areas. And what we've found is there's this loophole, even though the law is pretty strict on what you can and can't do on state land, as determined by the overseers, which is the Board of Land Commissioners. It's clear that you can't do it. You can't go out there and hunt. And we've got people that are doing it without any consequences. And the reason is because there's a loophole in the law that Our game wardens, our sheriffs can't issue citations, and I'm not sure why. The state lands just are a different animal. Every time I turn around, I find things that don't, laws that can't be enforced, laws that are ignored. So I bring this and I'll read the brief little part of the change, and it's on page 2, line 16. Trespassing on leased state lands classified and used as cultivated crops for the purpose of hunting or fishing without authorization from the board. And I'm not sure why this would change anything, but it does dramatically according to the people that are trying to enforce the law laid down by the land commissioners. I'd like to get this bill passed so that we don't have the loophole, and we don't allow people to just go out on state land and break the law without any chance of prosecution for it or citations or anything. So that's why I brought the bill, and hopefully some more questions will be answered by agencies that are affected by it. They've helped me with this, and I think we'll get clarification for some of those questions, and I'd stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Eklund. Any questions from the committee? Really good sponsor. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman, Vice Chairman. This might be a question that state land folks can answer, other folks, but I'm wondering how people will know exactly what the land is. Is it all well marked where it's croplands? Is it something that's marked in Onyx that it's not huntable because it shows up as a blue square on Onyx, right? So I just want to make sure that it's clear to the folks hunting that they can't hunt there, given that it is public land. So any clarification on that would be helpful.
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Provenza, so I think the same things would apply as they would for private land as to whether a hunter should be there or not. And a good hunter would understand the laws and have for a long time. This is the first I've heard of it. I guess it's gone on a couple of years in some areas. This case was brought in Goshen County, and it was a hunter that knew full well they were prohibited from hunting on the property, but nobody could do a thing about it. I'll go in, I'll hunt, the sheriff can't do anything about it, the game warden can't do anything about it. My hope is to close that loophole. Would all hunters know about it? Good hunters understand the law and where they should and shouldn't be. And more than likely, so what happens in my country and why folks have been buffaloed for a long time, nobody I've ever met that hunts would consider doing it on state land that without talking to the leasee ahead of time. And I know that's different in other parts, but there's a lot of cultivated land, pastures, and different private land surrounding it. If they don't get permission on the private land, they probably aren't going to hunt the public land either. So does that help you?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I maybe what I want to see is a photo of an example of these lands. I'm not familiar with state croplands. I don't disagree. I just am trying to, anyway, I think maybe someone has a specific parcel that they could point me to so I could see what that looks like on the user end.
Mr. Vice Chairman, so I don't have a photo, but let me try to get a picture into everybody's minds. You're on state land, it's cultivated cropland, there are pivot systems there, and there's a crop of beans. And presently, a person can drive across that crop of beans, which reduces the value of the crop. So that's a picture that maybe one of the more extreme ones, but a less extreme one would be out shooting on property that has pivots in the, whether it's alfalfa, corn stubble, or whatever, there are problems with that scenario.
Thank you, Representative Eklund. Further questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Representative. Is State Lands Office here? Please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. My name is Ben Bump. I'm Assistant Director at the Office of State Lands and Investments. No hunting on cultivated cropland is something that has been in the Board of Land Commissioners Chapter 13 rules since 1988. So it is how we've operated as an agency. If I might shed some light on Representative Provenza's question. In our online maps, we have a layer that is specifically no hunting on cultivated croplands. That layer is published on our maps. I believe it is shown on Onyx as well. So we inventory those lands that are classified and used as cultivated croplands. We also try and keep that as updated as possible. And on site, every one of those, again, as much as possible, is signed with a specific state lands sign that indicates no hunting on cultivated cropland. So again, our understanding is putting this prohibition into 36.2.107 that has been in rule for a long time is the effect of this bill. So with that, stand for any questions.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That rule you just talked about, is that no hunting period or no hunting without permission of the leasee?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schmidt, the language in that Chapter 13 Recreation Rules Board of Land Commissioners is the privilege of hunting and fishing is given on lands that are legally accessible, with the exception of no hunting and fishing on cultivated croplands, period.
Further questions for the Office of State Lands? Thank you, appreciate it. That cleared up some things for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Would the Game and Fish like to comment on this? Gentlemen. Welcome back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was glad that Ben was here. He answered a lot of the questions that I don't have to then. So, as you know, this bill provides penalties for trespassing for the purpose of hunting and fishing on cultivated land. As he stated, you know, in Chapter 13 of the Office of State Lands, the Board of Land Commissioners rules, it does say that state lands is open to hunting and fishing except those cultivated lands. So there's really no enforcement provision within statute for somebody to enforce that. It's in regulation, but it's not in statute. And so this would establish a penalty for violating or for trespassing on those cultivated lands. I did want to point out, though, since we've been up here talking about trespassing all morning, that this is not under Title 23. And so it does not fall into our normal hunting and fishing trespass. So it's neither a low misdemeanor or high misdemeanor. It's totally out of Title 23. It's in Title 36, where it has its own penalty provision. And so the penalties for that are a little bit different, but my expectation would be that when the Wyoming Supreme Court sets penalties for trespass, that we would try to align our trespass bond schedule to be the same. We do have this does give authority for Wyoming Game and Fish wardens to enforce under Title 36, but there's some of those regulations that would diminish our federal funding, and so we've entered into an MOU with OSLI so that we can enforce certain parts of it and not diminish our federal funding. And so right now, under our MOU, we enforce camping, campfires, and off-road travel. Other provisions in Title 36 we don't enforce. So it would take an amendment to our MOU, which I don't have a concern with, to allow us to enforce this provision as well. It was a great question that Representative Schmidt had. This would not allow, if you can't hunt on cultivated lands, you can't hunt on cultivated lands, whether it's the lessee or the members of the public. It would be closed to all hunting, and I would assume the expectation would be that we would have to enforce that equally across all users. And then Ben's already touched on the map. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Committee questions for the game of fish? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Further agency testimony? Any public testimony in the room?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Jess Johnson, Wyoming Wildlife Federation. I get to stand in front of you and support something. We are in support of this. I think it's just a clarifying clause to sort of let them enforce what we've already, as sportsmen, known was not something we could do. The one thing I will say, and I just want to use this time to bring a little light to, from a personal experience, we have a parcel in Lander that was state land and has cultivated sections on it. And it was kind of hard to figure out. Onyx is not always up to date on what the state website is. And so what I would say for the sportsmen that are listening to this, and maybe something that we can look to in the future, is that that OSLI website is amazing. You get on there, you can find it, you click the layer, it comes up, you're looking at the state land parcel. It's obvious, it's a red crosshatch. Onyx, most of the time, is up to date with that, but not always. There was a parcel in my area where it took me having conversations back and forth with a warden to discover if I could walk across this piece or if I could shoot the whitetail that was there. And I'll say that this was me being very scared of a trespassing clause, making these phone calls to see what I was legally able to do. So there is an element of, at some point, this bill needs to go through. This is a good piece of legislation. But we might want to look at how we make our accessibility more readily accessible so that it's, whether Onyx is updated or other Gaia, any of these other platforms that hunters and folks use that are GPS sort of private and public land pieces. So just a little note there, but happy to stand for any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Any questions for Wildlife Federation? Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Moline, up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau, sitting in favor of this legislation. So like every year, some of my members ask me, well, does the legislature really need to meet every year? And I think this is an example of why things, to close up some loopholes. One of the things I really appreciate with this is reading in the portion above the law that they're subject to restitution, along with the ability to be fined. So sitting in support of this bill, I would take any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Questions for Farm Bureau? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Further public testimony on House Bill 304. Anybody online? Okay, with that, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by Representative Davis, second by Representative Schmidt. Discussion on the bill. Question being called. Mark, please call the roll.
We're voting on House Bill 304 with no amendments. Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Eklund.
Aye.
Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Ottman.
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Strock.
Aye.
Chairman Winter.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0 in favor of passing this.
Take back over. Just go right ahead. Next bill for our consideration, plenty of time, House Bill 251. Mr. Speaker.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. How are you all this morning? Hope you got a nice, full, restful sleep. I left this building at 12:15 last night after our committee heard 3 more bills after you guys all went home. There's many of you. Some of you were here for that. Representative Johnson. Good morning, everyone. I bring you House Bill 251, trespass by drone. Give you some of the background on why I brought this bill. A couple years ago, actually, I was on this bill before and I never actually got to really see the light of day. And there was a lot of discussion about, limitations and stuff. And as we all know, drones are becoming more and more useful in every aspect of our lives, especially in agriculture. We've got folks that are using them to do remote information. We've even got drones now that are going into places and remotely spraying weeds, even on infrared and all this. I mean, it's exciting and it's amazing and it's unlimited, really, the potential that this provides for us in agriculture, security, everything else. But as you all may well know, and some of the information in our last little few news cycles here is that we're also a lot of questions in regards to drone and drone activity and who they own, who they're owned by and what they're doing and what they're up to. And I'll just give you one good instance of what really brought this bill for me that made it very real. And I think it's a discussion that we need to have and try to figure out how to provide some rights and some protections for people in this ever increasing and changing new field of technology. A couple years ago, my daughter was in the house with the kids, and she was just, for some reason, she stepped out onto the porch, and she said she was met with a drone at eye level just about 6-7 feet from the house. And it scared her so bad, she about ran into the door. She was not expecting to see that at eye level when you step out of your house. Well, evidently what the situation was that the power company was doing a survey on meters and lines. And she said she can just remember when she stepped out of the house and this thing was sitting right there. As soon as she stepped out, she said the thing on the bottom of it swiveled and looked at her. And he said, and then the thing took off up into the air and disappeared out of sight. And after she gathered herself up, she called me and said, "What's going on? If she could have got to a shotgun, I'm sure we would have been talking about a lot of other things here, but it was gone so fast, that wouldn't even been an option." But I guess in that particular situation, we found out later that it was our local power company that was doing surveys on lines, and there it goes back to the convenience and the usefulness of these machines and being able to stop people from having to walk these lines. They can fly right down close, they can look at them. This particular unit was evidently looking at the meter pole, right where the meter pole was right there, and the meter was. And this thing had come right down and was looking right at it, and it just so happened that was very close to the front door of the house. Okay, well, from the standpoint, I guess my first thought was, when I called the Precorp and asked them, what's going on, we are so sorry. We thought you were notified. We tried, we were gonna notify people and stuff like that, and they were really concerned about it, and they were awesome. They were good about taking care of it, and they did. But here's the other part of this, and in that situation, I mean, we worked that out. But what happens if somebody that's, you think you're private, you think you're able to be there? I like my wife, I said, she enjoys, sun tanning and laying out like many ladies and men probably do. If somebody would just be able to fly along, come and casually go through, and you think you're in the privacy of your backyard, and you're not. And so who do you blame? Who's responsible? Do you have the right to say that the property or the airspace above my home in my backyard is mine? And that if you want to come in there, no different than if you are treading on the surface of the soil, do I also have a right to privacy in my yard, around my property, over my property? Okay, now there's aircraft control areas. I mean, I was a licensed pilot. I've owned airplanes, and I was a licensed single engine land pilot. But we knew that our ground levels, AGL 500 feet above ground level was the level that we were taught that you stayed above. You didn't get down below that. You could maybe fly closer in certain situations, but you had to be very much away from any congested areas, 1,000 feet above and 1,000 feet away from certain obstacles, towers, things like that. There were restrictions that you had to abide by in order to make sure that you weren't impeding on somebody else's potential impacts on their property. And we followed that. If you wanted to keep your license, you didn't draw into those areas. Well, I guess what I'm trying to do here is basically say that you have a right to some airspace around your property. If I'm gonna be able to go outside of my house or going along through my ranch and things like that, I want my things protected, and these things actually do have an impact. Now, I didn't touch the ground, I didn't knock any of your grass down or anything like that, but in another instance I will give you, ladies and gentlemen, was I was at the shop behind my house right there and was working, and I had hunters in the field. And they were just across the river, and they were down in some cottonwood trees there, and the deer were starting to come off the hills and work down through the cottonwood. Well, they were archery hunters, and they were in their stands. Well, I could literally hear this thing from the shop, and I could, that's, what the sound is, that, you could hear it coming in. Well, I'm looking around, I could hear it, couldn't see it. Well, pretty quick, I could make it out, coming all over the neighbors, over the top of the ridge, dropped right down below the top level of the cottonwood trees, and went zooming up through and would stop, and it was taking pictures of the deer. Well, one of my hunters come back that evening and said, "What's up with the drone?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" I said, "I heard one." He said, "Yeah, that crazy thing was flying all over through those trees, taking pictures." He said it was, the deer were moving around and he was spooking the deer and everything like that. And then he said as soon as he got done, shot up and took out. But he said he just worked that bunch of trees and looked at all those deer over and over and over again. He said, "I never even got a chance to shoot at that buck. I watched him for an hour and a half, and here comes this drone." And he said, "It just molested these deer." So I did a little research on that deal and finally figured out who that was, and I called the owner. I would never have known if it wasn't a local small community. And I said, "What's up with that?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother your hunters or anything like that, but I can fly. I can fly. I wasn't near anybody. I didn't realize there was somebody in that tree stand." Well, he molested the snot out of that guy's hunt. And unbeknownst to him, and sure, there's nobody gonna get fined or anything like that. There's no law against that. And when you look at the CFRs and how and what they are able to do, basically, they can do everything but scalp along on the ground if you're not standing right there. And so that's the reasoning behind this. I just want to, and if nothing else, ladies and gentlemen, I'd love to see this pass, but if nothing else, I want to instigate the conversation to say, do I have a right to airspace, even up to 200 feet? I'd like for you to stay 200 feet above the ground. Now, they're limited right now to 400 feet. And the FAA has designed a 100-foot barrier between them and the 500 feet AGL between the aircraft. So they're hoping that that's the proper buffer, that they don't get up in there. And I, as a pilot, I really don't want to hit one of those things either. But in reality, anything below that, then they can do whatever they want. Well, I'm asking that if I don't want to step out of my house and see one of those things staring me in the face. I mean, there's other situations where I've seen when you're in that situation where it could be even going into some of the statutes regarding to wildlife. That's harassment of wildlife. It's chasing game. You can get nailed for that. But how do you know? Whose is it? How do you find them? How do you track them? I've got county roads that run all through my property. I've got a state highway that runs through my property. I've got state lands that have county roads that are in my property that I lease. People can pull in, park, take that thing, shoot, and go wherever they want. No regard for what they're doing, where they're at, or anything. And it's my job to try to catch them. It's my job to try to find out who that thing belongs to. And I know you can't shoot them, but that would be a real simple way to find out who owns that thing, because they'll come looking for it. And I get that. You can't shoot them. But the reality of it is, that thing to me is trespassing. That thing's inside my private property that I'm responsible for, that I have control over, I believe. If something goes through and they pop up over a hill and fly through some of my horses and it spooks them horses and run one through a fence or something like that, who's liable? I can't find them. I have no way of identifying whose that is. I've got places where they can park and take off and go from with public access to. No regard. My thought was, if you stay above 200 feet, you're gonna probably do less job of impacting me. And if you got a camera good enough that you're gonna take pictures from 200 feet, then I guess bully. And if you need those pictures, whatever. But in this situation, in this piece of legislation, I want to have the ability to say that if you're under that level and I catch you and I can find out, I can charge you, or I can get something and make you not do that. Because I think a lot of times people just say, there's no harm done, there's no impact, nobody got bothered. And it just goes on. You know, and I'm not trying to undermine the ability and the usefulness of them for law enforcement, security, and for people that want to use them in real estate, to video properties and things like that. The uses are unbelievable and they're awesome. But if you're going to be doing that and you're going to be close to my place, then I ought to have the ability to say, yeah, you got permission to fly that level. Go ahead, do it. But I want to know that you're there. I want to be able to give you permission to be in there and not find out after the fact, because catching them is impossible, ladies and gentlemen. We all know that. There's no identification on them. It's a bunch of hassle, but it's just, I mean, and I look forward to the discussion. There's some folks here, and we've got an amendment here that has been brought by some of the folks that are going to be, you know, potentially impacted by this. And I won't even, you know, put that in, but I certainly am not against it. They can certainly come up and explain why we need it. But the only part about this, and you're going to hear about it, is they're wanting to say, or for legitimate business purposes on page 1, line 11. They would like to insert that as otherwise permitted by law, or for legitimate business purposes. I got no problem with that, but who determines legitimate? All I'm asking for is if you're going to be running around over the place, just give me a holler. Get permission first, and I'll legitimize your business purpose. So with that, I would ask Stan for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any questions for Representative Eklund?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Speaker Nineman, so some of the, I guess, as I look through this, if we put in legitimate business purposes, would that take care of, probably not, but take care of the REA who wants to fly this thing and save some money for you and me?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund, I'm sure it would, but really, in that situation, when we had that, they said it was our oversight, we should have contacted you. That was, we knew that we were gonna be in there and we're running the lines, we'll call you. We'll find out if that's okay and make sure and let you know that we're gonna be in the area. Even before, when they came in and would do, you know, pole checks and wire and insulator checks and things like that, they always told you, hey, you know, get you a phone call. Hey, there's gonna have, our people are gonna be in the area, you're gonna see our trucks, we're gonna be going down through this sections or whatever, checking it. So, yeah, I'm sure in those situations, it just stands to reason that they would contact you and let you know that they're gonna be in there and you're gonna be notified of it, so.
Follow up. I'm thinking, Mr. Vice Chairman, follow up. I'm thinking that the bill covers that we probably don't need to insert legitimate business purposes, because then it might take the landowner out of it. You probably researched this pretty well. Is there any way of amending in that we may shoot drones?
Oh, you're gonna, Mr. Chairman, yes, Representative Eklund, and these folks behind me can better answer that, because it is against the law to do that. I mean, you're shooting down an aircraft and everything like that. But I do think we're getting to a point here where that is just okay, you've got a dog and he's turned him loose and he's out and he's running my cattle. You own that dog, that is your dog. Do I have the right to stop that dog from harassing my livestock? Absolutely. I can shoot your dog if I need to. And then I can, because he's harassing my livestock, I can charge you double for the cost of that livestock. If they get damaged or harassed or slip their calves or lose their lambs or whatever. So this idea that somehow that particular piece of your personal property, no different than that dog is a piece of your personal property, somehow is exempted from the responsibility that it bears to the impacts on me, I think that is where this discussion is going to eventually end up. If I damage you with my vehicle, if I damage you with anything, it's your personal property, you're liable. But right now, I don't know how in the world you would do it. I mean, I'll give you another quick scenario and then we'll move on because there's a lot of good people that need to chat behind me and opine on this because I look forward to hearing their discussion. Another issue that we have, and it's not this specifically, but we deal with it every summer, is because we live right close to a really nice airport, joins our property. I've got a group of people that come up out of Colorado and they love to fly in our area. Big, deep canyons, warm and cooling air, beautiful mornings within sight of that stump we call the Devil's Tower, and everything else. It's beautiful terrain. Well, them ladies and gentlemen take off in the morning at daylight and they own my ranch and all the other ranches around them. They fly down that river bottom, they fly over my livestock, they scatter my cows, and there's not a thing I've asked, I've called. There's nothing you can do about it, Chip. Unless they're touching something, unless they're on the ground, that's just their right to do that according to the laws. My wife was on a horse one morning coming up through there, and because of the way the draws are in our particular country, this guy with his motorized parachute was below the level of the land she was riding on, coming up a draw. And she said, I'm riding along, and she says, and all of a sudden, this thing comes up out of the draw, it pops right up and spins right over top. She said, I hung with him. She said, I about thought I was going to get unloaded. He had no idea I was there. Now, there's another deal where they can skim along on the ground legally with no regard for potential impacts. And they had no idea anybody was there. There were no buildings there, no nothing. He was just enjoying the fly up the draw. But when he popped out at the end of the draw, we were doing our ranching operation there. And so those are the kind of things, and I mean, and we're not going to solve that right now. But as more and more people enjoy these types of activities and do these things, they do have impacts and they do affect us. And as a private property owner, I want to know that I have the ability to protect my private property and to protect at least some airspace above it to keep this stuff up and away from where we're trying to do business without stopping them from being able to enjoy it. I think of a real estate agent. I've heard this last time we talked about it. We just discussed this before. I want to take pictures of these ranches, and what happens if I have to swing out onto your place to come and get a really beautiful angle of this ranch I'm getting ready to sell? That's not a problem. Call me. You know it's over my property, just give me a holler. Then let me know. Please don't make it like as if it's some horrible impact to let some private landowner know about the impacts that you're creating for them. So hopefully that'll answer your question.
Thank you, Representative Nyman. Questions? Representative Ottman. Oh,
Just a follow-up. That's why I asked the question, Mr. Vice Chairman. That's why I asked the question about shooting drones is we have nuisance dogs we take care of. Another one, as you were talking, is they could float down your river.
Oh, yes.
And do what they want to. And we're nowhere there. Let's stay away from it. I should have kept my mouth shut. But we'll have some clarity on how to get rid of drones without shooting them down.
Well, and Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I appreciate the discussion. And whether or not this piece of legislation comes to fruition, I look forward to what I'm going to hear behind me, because I think these folks are going to be able to bring some different perspectives that I'm probably missing. And but from the private landowner's perspective, I'd like you to keep that machine 200 feet above the ground, well below your service ceiling that you can operate under. If you're going to fly, and if you want to operate under that 200 foot, give me a holler. And I'd be glad to let you do it if you're doing it for legitimate purposes. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's any other questions.
Thank you. Public testimony. Oh, well, we moved on. Gentlemen, welcome. Go ahead, floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, committee, thank you very much. We'll be as brief as possible. We just request on behalf of law enforcement on what I think this is a very timely discussion and necessary. I agree with.
Pardon my intrusion. Would you state your name real quick?
I'm sorry, Chairman. I'm Colonel Tim Cameron. I'm the Administrator of Wyoming Highway Patrol. With me this morning is Lieutenant Colonel Carl Germain and the Aeronautics Administrator for YDOT, Brian Olson. Our request is fairly straightforward. I think we submitted an amendment to this bill, and that is for a law enforcement exception. I think you'll see in the amendment verbiage, which would become Section B, shall not apply to law enforcement officers engaged in performance of their official duties. 2 is for Department of Corrections. 3 is for emergency medical responders with the same definition, engaged in performance of duties. Section 4 and 5 is submitted for your consideration. I can speak to the law enforcement use of drones or unmanned aerial systems specifically, but again, that's submitted for your consideration. The WHP and a number of other agencies have very specific policies on the use of unmanned aerial systems. What we're talking about in these exceptions are typically emergent, and I'll defer to Lieutenant Colonel to talk about some of the examples of our use of our unmanned aerial systems.
Good morning, Mr. Co-Chair. Lieutenant Colonel Carl Germain. I've been with the Highway Patrol for going on 20 years now. Law enforcement has seen an evolution in a drone technology, just like the representative was alluding to. Some of the things that the Highway Patrol uses drones for on nearly a daily basis will be for crash investigation. And a good example of where we may cross into private property is if a vehicle leaves the roadway and goes through the right-of-way fence. That drone will go up to photograph, and then with the advent of 3D mapping can actually get some pretty significant mapping and measurements of the crash scene. And that really does aid into the investigation and try to bring closure to victims as well as justice if there is a person being charged with particular crimes. Other areas that I've personally seen these drones used for will be for, say, a manhunt. And a good example of that was a few years ago up in Crook County. One of our troopers stopped out with a gentleman on the side of the road. A gunfight ensued. Thankfully, at that time, no one was hurt, and the gentleman takes off and starts running through a number of private properties. And we were left to call troopers in and have to go start walking through the woods. And at that time, we didn't have any night vision capability except for drones. So as our officers were walking through the woods, we had drones overhead that had flare thermal technology, trying to look for the suspect. We did not locate him with the help of a drone, but it does help keep did help keep the officers safe. That suspect was located the next morning in a privately owned wheat field. Rancher found him. Gunfight ensued, and then the suspect was shot by a responding law enforcement. Other options where I've seen him go on the private property are, say if there's a vehicle crash and the driver or occupants get disorientated and they'll wander away sometime from the crash scene. We'll put drones up in the air to try to locate a crash victim, especially if the weather is cold. We don't want them suffering from exposure. And obviously, there's a number of other uses for drones in law enforcement, but those are some of the ones that I know of personally and that we use. The other thing is when we're mapping a crash scene, the typical height that will fly to get photos and measurements is as low as 50 feet and up to as high as 400 feet. And then sometimes we will go down a little bit lower to get more detailed photos of the crash vehicles. And with that, I'll stand for questions, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. I've got a question. So from my understanding, if there's a crash site or something that's already been on somebody's property, it seems that it would be a reasonable ask that they would be notified that there was a crash on their property. And as a part of that, you would notify them that says, hey, we're going to be flying this drone around. Is that an unreasonable ask, or what? I guess I don't see anything that's unreasonable in that request there.
Mr. Co-Chair, I personally don't believe that making an attempt to notify the landowner would be unreasonable. We do that all the time with livestock out on the highways. We'll make every reasonable attempt to contact the owner of the livestock. And sometimes they're not available, they're not there, but we would make an attempt. And I think if you added language to the statute that would request us to do so, I personally don't have any issue with making the attempt. I mean, we, in most cases, know who the landowners are, would have access to it, and working with our dispatchers, brand inspectors, and local law enforcement to make that notification.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. If we had a requirement, though, for you to make a request and it's not a crash issue and it's more of like suspect running through yards, does that hinder your investigation ability if you're having to spend time trying to call people to do that?
Mr. Co-Chair, Representative Provenza, yes, it could slow down a response time if it was something that was emergent. Perhaps language could be added to the amendments to carve out both requests. Typically with a crash investigation, it's a little bit more static, but in the example that you provided, that's one of a dynamic nature that's rapidly evolving and unfolding, and we may not have time to make those notifications immediately.
Mr. Chair, if I could add to that, great question. In both examples, the crash, our intent is to get that roadway open as soon as possible and when it's safe to do so. So in the scenario that we gave you, if there's damage to fencing or property, we would notify that owner and include that in our crash report. But what would concern me is slowing down that process to get the roadway open or dealing with the problem and the example that Representative Provenza gave. So certainly after the fact, that wouldn't be an issue. But again, most of what we're talking about for these exceptions are all emergent.
Any follow-up? Any further questions? All right, did you have anything, sir?
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair, as Colonel Cameron indicated, I'm Brian Olson, Aeronautics Administrator. I'm mostly here to answer any questions that you may have. The only thing I would draw your attention to is Congress has delegated the Federal Aviation Administration with the exclusive authority to regulate the aviation safety and the efficient use of airspace by aircraft, which has already been indicated by previous testimony, but something that the committee may want to take into account. It's most likely subject to federal preemption.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Olson? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and maybe I missed some of this earlier when I had to step out. My understanding is that the federal aviation standard is 500 with that 100-foot buffer. So is the current 200 feet problematic with what you were discussing?
Mr. Co-Chair, Representative Provenza, the CFR governing unmanned aircraft systems allows them to fly up to 400 feet, which is what we're discussing here. And so the 200 feet, I'm hazarding a guess here because I'm not an attorney and I'm not speaking on behalf of the FAA. But I would say that the FAA would most likely feel that a large swath of trespass law that does not allow drones to cross land, they would say that it's inhibiting the efficient use of the airspace. But I'm hazarding a guess, like I say.
Further questions? Gentlemen, thank you. Appreciate it. Further testimony? Come on up. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of WASCOP, the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And in general terms, we have the same ask that you heard from Highway Patrol for law enforcement exemptions. And I did get a copy of the proposed amendments that they'd provided. And if you look at point number 3, it has an exemption for emergency medical responders. And I think that would be a good place to also insert search and rescue. They're not necessarily a county employee, so they might not meet some of the other definitions. So having this specific language of search and rescue when, working for the sheriff under the sheriff's purview, I think is very important. And then, we just say that to kind of continue the testimony that you've already heard, oftentimes notification or permission to get flyover capabilities would be difficult in a rapidly evolving situation. I think that most times we can keep it above 200 feet, but I do want to, especially in the search and rescue and life-saving components of uses of drone, I would like to add that some of our drones have communications capabilities on them. So we can't communicate with the person at 200 feet, but we can bring that drone down and actually talk to and have a two-way conversation with people. And of course, there's lots of emerging technology coming daily with that. So we want to anticipate things that might be coming with the technology. And other than just supporting the testimony you've already heard this morning from our friends with Highway Patrol, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Thompson? Questions? Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Wilkinson. I am here on behalf of American Property Casualty Insurance Association. Thank you for the honor of presenting in front of you this morning. I am not often in front of Ag Committee. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of APCIA, I think we are neutral on the bill, but we are offering a clarifying proposed amendment that would just read "or for legitimate business purposes," as a good speaker had mentioned. I don't think we really have any issues with this bill. We just want to clarify that those companies that may be using drones in the normal course of their operations are allowed to do so. I don't believe that there is very much law, Wyoming law, on drones, and so just clarifying that legitimate business purposes may help those that are using it. So in an insurance capacity, a lot of times adjusters will use it after like a big hailstorm, or even if they're looking at properties, potential properties that would work for underwriting if they're going to do business in the area. I believe a lot of other industries are behind me as well that just use them in the normal course of their businesses. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we would just propose this amendment be added to the bill just simply for clarification. We are neutral on it. We just think that little bit of clarification is needed. And with that, I would stand for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Wilkinson. I believe that this is one of the things that we were talking about earlier, and for legitimate business purposes makes sense, except for the fact that that then would also be like ranching, insurance, real estate agents, all of those people that are prone to using this technology could actually be there doing that. So there has to be a way to say, to limit that in some way with permission or something like that. The other thing I was just gonna add, and not to be funny, but just to say that there was a case in 1946 where a large military aircraft flew 83 feet above a farmer's land. Made the chickens crazy. They all ran into everything, killed themselves. And so United States versus Cosby, the court ruled in favor of the farmer. So we at least are entitled to 83 feet. So there is precedent to continue on in something like this. It's not like it's totally unheard of. So I just wanted to mention that in going along with the limitations and the expansion of that. So I would just say, I think it needs a little bit more protection.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I believe that on page 1, line 15, without without authorization by the landowner or resident, or pursuant to court order. I do believe that that does cover some of that permission. And not to say that there aren't bad actors, because there certainly are, but I think the majority of people that are using this technology are trying to do so within legitimate business purposes and would seek the permission of landowners before pursuing those endeavors.
Further questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Vice Chairman David Bush, here on behalf of Black Hills Energy, and happy to be in front of this committee. I'm not in front of your committee very often, but I do feel like I'm learning things, bless you. I had no idea that chickens could die from running around like that, so love this legislature. I learn something new every day. Anyway, just wanted to rise in support of the amendment offered by YDOT. That does include utility services as part of this, as the speaker mentioned, and I was feverishly texting my folks to make sure that wasn't us that was flying a drone in front of his daughter's house, and I don't think it was, Mr. Speaker.
I don't know where you're from, but no, it was pre-corp, they're fine, I got it worked out.
Yeah, it's pre-corp, those co-op guys. We do use our drones for checking lines, things like that has been discussed, but we do also try to do our best to communicate with landowners before we're going to be anywhere near their property and flying over their land, things like that. It comes down to just being a good partner and being a good agent of the landowner and that sort of thing. But it is for us an important way that we can get out and, like I said, check those lines and check pipelines and things that we need to do. So we would encourage the committee to keep that exception in there. So with that.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Bush? Representative Eklund.
Mr. Vice Chairman, just to be clear, so that exception you're talking about, this amendment proposed on legitimate business purposes, we have some other.
YDOTs.
Oh, that one? Okay, all right.
Yes,
Thank
sir. It
you,
was,
sir.
yeah, it was language included in the one that the YDOT presented.
Representative Johnson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thanks. When you fly your drones, that's mostly in your easements, right? I mean, you don't stray. I mean, that's a legitimate purpose of your drones, and I don't see any problem with that.
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative, correct. Yeah, that's what we wanted to make sure that language is still included in there as part of the, whether it's the amendment offered by the insurance group or YDOT, that there was just that piece that recognized that we do have the legitimate business access or whatever the verbiage is there. I don't have it in front of me right away. Or the as needed for utility services as part of that as well. So.
Further questions? All right, Mr. Detail, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, Travis Detail with the Mining Association, and really appreciate the discussion, really appreciate the speaker's intent on bringing this legislation, because the drone technology and the use of drones is growing. We use it quite a bit in the mining industry, specifically our surface mines across the state, whether they be coal or bentonite or uranium. We are using drones right now for monitoring reclamation, for surveying, monitoring stockpiles, to monitor dust, and a myriad of things, and the use is growing. And I want to be clear that when we're using them, my operators and my member companies have very, very good working relationships with landowners. Not all, but for the most part. And and that's when we support the addition of the language for legitimate business purposes. That's not going to supplant landowner relationships. And when they're sending out a drone that may have to cross a property line to do a turnaround and stuff like that communication is going to continue. It's not going to be supplemented. But I think with the addition of the language, that Mrs. Wilkerson offered, it just gives that little bit of extra protection and something you get an unusual circumstance. Say, for instance, the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have a high wall collapse. You need to get a drone out. You got to send it over. It's got to come at an angle where you can't actually notify a landowner unless you want to wake the speaker up at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, we're going to run a drone really over your property really quick. Just for those certain situations. Just for those certain situations. Again, I don't think that it doesn't change the relationship with the landowner one way or the other. But I think that in a bill like this, very much like Mr. Vice Chairman, with as we've been talking about foreign ownership bills, you don't want to cast the net too wide. You want to get who you want to get and get those guys got, and not get the guys that you don't want to get. And I think just that little phrase from the insurance folks and Ms. Wilkerson kind of covers that base. And, if that language is included, then we're comfortable with the bill. And again, appreciate the discussion because, this is a big issue and it's going to get bigger. And, I think this is a really good place to start. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, with that, I'd stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. Detail? Thank you. Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. And I certainly understand the issues these fine young gentlemen brought up. That's not the people we're after. In many instances, I would rather have a pipeline company or an electric company, be it REA or the other type. I'd rather have them come out and use a drone rather than driving through. If it's after a storm, I'd rather have them, if they have to inspect the lines, I'd rather have them use a drone than coming through with a pickup and potentially doing damage. So appreciating and not against the proposed amendments either by the insurance industry or by the Highway Patrol or by the Sheriff's Association. One thing I would ask, if I can get this to work, under Section B, many times, I understand getting them, the fines and the imprisonment, and I don't know if it's needed, but something about, they're subject to repayment for damages. The testimony that we heard this morning, what livestock are worth. I don't know if this would be the appropriate place to put, or if it's already covered in other areas. I don't understand the law that well, but, not only subject to the fine, but also if they do damages to either resources or livestock, any damage that would be caused by the drone, they would be subject for repayment to the owner of that resource. Sitting in support of the bill and the amendments, Mr. Chairman, I'd sit for any questions you may have for me.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Moline? Okay, thank you. Further public testimony? If there is, we're going to be brief. Anybody online, Mark?
Yes, Devin Brubaker.
All right, Devin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Devin Brubaker. I'm the airport director for the Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport and the president of the Wyoming Airports Coalition. Mr. Chairman, the Airports Coalition does not have a position on this bill. As the largest group of aviation professionals in the state, we're simply here to provide some information for you. First, Mr. Chairman, please be aware that my colleagues and I all lack law degrees, so we will defer to your more than capable LSO staff to guide you in avoiding federal preemption issues when it comes to regulating airspace and the operation of aircraft. However, while many in our society see unmanned aircraft differently than manned aircraft, federal law does not. The FAA has exclusive authority to regulate aviation safety and airspace efficiency with respect to UAS operations at any altitude. Furthermore, I want to stress that the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice are the only entities able to authorize counter UAS efforts. That means that it is expressly prohibited to do anything to an unmanned aircraft traversing the airspace the same way it is expressly prohibited to do anything to a manned aircraft traversing the airspace. The FAA has published a fact sheet regarding state and local regulation of UAS to help lawmakers across the country avoid preemption in their efforts We think this conversation is important, but we do recognize some serious concerns that a blanket application to over all private property will likely create a preemption issue from the FAA. This is a topic that's being discussed on both sides of the Capitol, and I think it's a topic that is worthy of a interim topic, but I would encourage you to be cautious as you move forward with this bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, stand for any questions.
Thank you. Appreciate the testimony. Questions, committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Eklund.
Could you send us those regulations, at least the committee here? We can't do it this morning, but if the bill passes, I'd like to have that information in a more complete form than we have right now.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, absolutely. I'll get that in an email off to all of you as soon as I'm offline here.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Representative Schmid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask the Sheriff's Department a question?
Sure.
They're still here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan Thompson with Westcott.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Are you seeing a lot of drone activity now with your?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. It hadn't been something that we've talked about in my role, but just leading up to this bill, I'm hearing from sheriffs that have had unknown drone activity that they're trying to investigate. And so that's becoming an issue in several parts of our state. Okay. So I think it is an emerging issue with us.
Thank you.
Further questions, committee? Okay. Any more people online, Mark? Okay, with that, we'll close public comment. How would we like to proceed on this committee? We got 6 minutes. Moved by Representative Ottman. Second? Second by Representative Eklund. Discussion on the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Provenza.
if the committee wants to amend the bill, my suggestion would be to withdraw the amendment since we are scheduled to meet upon adjournment and work the bill then, so that we can get up to the floor. Yeah, that's my recommendation.
Representative Davis.
In lieu of all the testimony that we've heard here, I'm afraid the good speaker has just scratched the surface of this. You know, I mean, with the many different issues from the different agencies out there, with the uncertainty, with the FFS, whatever that guy is back there. And, you know, I think this would be a great interim topic because it's more than just what the bill presents. I think there's a lot of different nuances to it. So my suggestion would be, whatever it is, we table the bill and turn it into an interim topic.
Thank you. This is my preference. I would like to see it move forward specifically to keep the discussion alive. I think that we've had some good ideas. We have some good amendments. I think that if we get it to the floor and have some 62 further ideas on it, I would like to keep the discussion going forward because I think it is a growing issue and something that we can't just put on the back burner and visit it one time during the summer, but that would just be my thoughts on it, but further discussion by the committee? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we handled this topic, the specific topic in judiciary, I believe it was 2 years ago during the interim. That committee had 3 or 4 attorneys on it. We heard from all these folks. We heard, you know, we have concerns about the issue of maybe law enforcement, of our military. It is complicated. That's all to say. So I'd hate to rush it. I think an interim discussion is what this needs. And we've got a new judiciary committee. We've got a new body for at least half of the folks are new. So yeah, I would just caution that I get the discussion point, but you might be pushing through some legislation that's going to have a lot of unintended consequences.
Committee? Further discussion, Representative Schrock.
Thank you, Chairman Banks. I would agree with Representative Banks because all of these have been addressed. We have them, all the testimony, they have amendments. We need to just get them in there and work it and get it up to the floor. Thank you.
Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say too that the gentleman that was just on here a little bit ago, since he's sending that data information from the Fed, we'll have all of that as well. So we're going to have a lot of research already done.
Representative Schmidt?
I would tend to agree with Representative Davis. I mean, we didn't even touch the question, and maybe it was asked in previous years about flying at night, you know? I think that's gonna be a big issue as well. So I think we need to have more time and get more people in here, more experts. I mean, we've got 62 people on the floor, but none of us are experts in this, so that's just the reality of it. And I think we need to have some better people and more discussion on this topic before we move forward.
Representative Eklund?
Mr. Vice Chairman, so sometimes to get something done, you end up passing things that do have unintended consequences, and as you proceed through those things, you correct those problems later. I'd like to see this move through. I think an interim topic would be a great idea, but we can get further ahead if we move it along. First thing we'd have to do is, bill sponsor's not here, and see if these amendments are okay with him, and maybe study the rules and regulations a bit, but we could pass this and still work on it when it gets to the floor.
Thank you, Representative. So there is a motion on the table. Would we like to add this amendment in, or would we like to have it as a committee of the whole amendment? Preference of the committee there?
Committee of the whole, I think.
Okay.
We don't have time.
Well, without further discussion on the bill, Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When is the deadline to have bills done? Is it Friday? Today?
They have to-
Tomorrow?
Yeah, Friday, they have to leave committee, or leave.
Leave the committee
Standing committee.
by tomorrow.
So we'd be all right.
Without further discussion. Mark, call the roll on House Bill 251. Question been called.
So we're voting on House Bill 251 with no amendments, right? Okay. Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Davis,
No.
Representative Eklund,
Aye.
Representative Johnson,
Aye.
Representative Ottman,
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
No.
I'm sorry,
No.
thank you. Representative Schmidt,
No.
Representative Strock,
Aye.
Chairman Winter.
Aye.
Vote is 6 aye, 3 no. This would pass.
Thank you. And we'll take these amendments and run them as committee of the whole amendments. I think we can do that and get